Hey everyone, this week I'll speak a bit more about PHP variables and scope, why it's important to use variables and what are they. Okay, firstly, variables are containers for stored information. I found a really interesting analogy that relates computer programming variables to a normal bucket or pail. We can store anything in our bucket. It could be apples, it could be fishing baits, it could even be cleaning aids. This is the exact same concept for variable. We can store data and information under the container name or the variable name. Secondly, variables are variable. If I refer back to the bucket analogy, if we toss out all of our apples in our bucket and we put in peaches, the bucket still stays the bucket, but its contents can vary. Therefore, it's variable. Our programming variable containers are also able to store other data types whenever we want to change it. Variables are built on four main attributes: the name, the type, the value, and the scope. So in the variable name, we start to declare it by giving the $sign and we give it a descriptive name. It's best practice to have a descriptive name so we know what it is and can remember it later on in our program. It has to be followed by a alphabetic character or an underscore. It cannot be a number. There are different data types such as a string, an integer, an array. It could even be a Boolean or a float. But those data types are our values, and we assign our values to our variable names by using the assignment operator, which is the equal sign. I will speak more about the last word here, scope, in the next few slides. So there are four main scopes in PHP: the local scope, the global scope, the super global scope, and the static scope. And this affects how variables can be accessed within a program and how the different elements within a program interacts with the data stored in the variable. So firstly, we have the local scope. This is when a variable is declared within a function. That local variable can only be accessed within that function. If I look at this example over here, I have a function over here. I name a variable within the function, which is in local scope now. And I then want to echo the name of this local scope variable. If I call the function, it will output New York City. Below the function call, I do again with the echo city name. This will output an error because we cannot access the variable name city name, which is in local scope. This is in global scope. I'll speak a bit more about global scope now. Global scope is when a variable is declared outside of a function. For instance, I have city name equals London, the string London. That is in global scope. However, if we want to use, we cannot access a global variable scope, a global scope variable from within a function. We have to use the global keyword. However, this doesn't set city name as a local variable scope. This is then global scope that it inherits. So if I do anything and I change anything about city name, it will change the global scope. For instance, I output the global scope variable and it outputs London. I then change city name variable to New York City, and I echo that out. When I run this, it will first echo out London. I then change the global scopes variable, and it will be New York City. However, once this is finished, it will then output New York City because the city name, the global variable, has changed. It has been changed within the function. Next we have is static scope. So after a function is executed, all local variables are deleted. If I refer back to the previous one, this inherits the global scope. It does not create a local scope variable. But if I do create a local scope variable, I give it a 0. I want to output it. It will output 0. I want to iterate it +1. Every time I call that, it will delete the iteration, and it will start over with the count is equal to 0. So therefore, if I run a local scope, it will always output 0. If I use the static keyword, it's when we want to keep the local variable's value. For instance, I have a static count equals to 0. I run it, it outputs it, and then it iterates it. So the first one, it outputs to 0. It iterates it, so it equals to 1 now. I output it, and then it iterates it to 2. The same thing happens on and on every time we call our function and it runs the function. The last one we have is the super global scope. These are variables that can be accessed from anywhere in the program, regardless of its scope or accessibility. I'm sure some of you recognize the _server variable. This was used in the PHP motors enhancement. Yeah, so the main super global variables are global, server, request, post, get, files, end, session, and cookie. I'll give it a little bit more about globals. For instance, it is a super global array. So you can access all global variables through the globals array as a super global. So for instance, I have a global variable called total. I then want to echo total. So I don't even need to use the global keyword in here. I just use the global's super global, and therefore it will output the total, which is 33.4 when I run this function. I hope you learn a little bit more about PHP variables and scope, and I hope you all the best for this week. Thanks.